In our commitment to embracing environmentally conscious choices, a significant hurdle we encounter revolves around the lack of clear information regarding sustainable materials. Often, we find ourselves lacking crucial data on the origins of materials, their manufacturing processes, and their overall environmental impact. This information gap poses a challenge for both industries and designers, hindering their ability to make well-informed decisions for a more sustainable future. Today, we engage in a conversation with Phanos, the co-founder of 2050 Materials. The groundbreaking initiative involves the creation of a central digital library, a repository where architects and contractors can access, compare, and optimize a selection of sustainable building products while facilitating the seamless dissemination of this vital information downstream.
So my name is Phanos. I'm one of the co-founders of 2050 Materials. 2050 basically is a company we found to try to simplify the access to, but also the use of sustainability data relating to anything material-wise in the construction sector. So basically, you're a designer, you're an architect, you want to know more about the impact of a specific project you're working on in terms of the materials, and it's super hard to find the data, so we're trying to make
That's
that
wonderful.
easy.
Out of curiosity, what was the problem that you were trying to address by the creation of this company?
So maybe it's worth talking a little bit about how the idea came to us. So before this job, I was working in the financial sector, specifically with real estate companies. So I was sort of helping the real estate investors set climate strategies and then use data to kind of align their portfolios according to those strategies, which is a really cool job, but it is very much not linked to the real world. So it's a bunch of investors making decisions about money and kind of using data to understand things and to sort of set targets. But where I really started getting bothered is they were talking about a lot of performance criteria on buildings in their portfolio, so kind of making them more sustainable, but without ever thinking, do we have the technologies to do that? Do designers and architects actually know how to design more sustainable buildings? So there was this sort of mismatch between what the client, which is the investor, is actually starting to ask for and what the person on the ground that does the design and then eventually the construction has access or knowledge to actually achieve. So 2050 Materials kind of gives tools and data to the industry so that they can actually deliver on what the top-down demand is asking for.
How does 2015 work in terms of a business practice? How does it actually work in terms of technologies?
So there's two things we have. So we have a web application, which is basically a digital material library, primarily for architects. So you can go in, you can essentially do your specification as you would with any other digital tool. The main difference being that on 2050 Materials, you find a bunch of data on the sustainability performance of each material you're specifying. So instead of just looking at the strength capabilities, the aesthetic aspect, you also are able to look at things like recyclability and carbon footprints, and you're able to kind of optimize that. So that's number one. There's the platform for that. And then what we've been doing more lately is we have an API product, which is essentially a fancy way of saying we connect that data to other tools and digital processes. So for large design companies, we essentially plug our API into their BIM systems or into their digital workflows, and we try to show the same kind of data, but without having the architect exit.
So you're talking about data a lot in this conversation. I want to kind of double click on that data statement. A lot of the conversations I've had revolve around the development of data, and specifically when it comes down to materiality, the development of sustainable data comes a challenge. In terms of the development of sustainable data, is it provided to you? Is it given to you? Do you assist or you help with building the attributes to get that data from those manufacturers? How exactly do you gather all that data from all those sources?
Yeah, I guess that's, a lot of the work we do is basically that. So The raw data, so the most raw format of data is given to us. So we essentially extract or we get from manufacturers whatever we can. The work we do is we sort and structure the data, and then we interpret it in a way that a designer can understand without necessarily having to have a PhD in sustainability metrics, you know. So we essentially do all of that work in simplifying the data, but we don't do the assessment per se. So we don't go to the factory and assess the process of the manufacturer. We get essentially whatever data they can provide, and then we structure the data so that it's understandable by the designers.
I also hear the word PhD and understanding sustainable data come up a lot in terms of conversation. Out of curiosity, and I just because out of my own curiosity, how do you rate or simplify the sustainable data into something that could be digestible for a designer in their process?
That's a good question. I mean, there's two steps to it, I would say, and it's also worth saying the sector is maturing in that aspect. So the first kind of most basic thing you have to do is extract the data from a format that looks very complicated to at least just showing the one metric the designer needs to look at. Often these sustainability assessments, like in environmental product declarations, they sit in a table which has 50 other metrics you never need to look at, really. So it's just the complexity of that. So number one is just, you know, getting the right number and putting it in a format that's easy to compare, making the units you know, the same between two products, so you're comparing apples to apples. The second way we provide an indication of, you know, you might have a number of a carbon footprint, for example, 10 kilograms of CO2 per square foot or whatever, and that might mean nothing to someone who hasn't seen carbon footprints before. So what we do is we look at the whole data set that we have within a specific product type. So essentially we look at what other products are there that you could be using, for example, if you're looking at cladding products, and then we sort of give an indication of where it sits within the range of possibilities. So if you're picking something that's really bad compared to what you could be picking, then that sort of is shown. Whereas if you're picking something on the top part of, let's say, performance side of things, then you would go through that.
In your opinion, do you feel that certain types of materials are further ahead in their development of, you know, EPDs or I would say any degree of education when it comes to sustainability over others, like concrete or wood or any type of that?
Definitely there's differences. I would say that the interior materials that are used in a lot of commercial projects, so for example, carpets or tiles or even bathroom tiles, they have a lot of certificates. They've done a lot of work as an industry to, you know, assess the impact. Also now they're doing more work in the circular economy direction, so sort of indicating which and how their products can be reused, and some of them are even introducing kind of take back schemes. So a lot of things that I would say are way ahead of other parts of buildings. The heavy materials like the steel and the concrete and wood, I guess, which is becoming more popular now, of course they have less work that was done by the industry to show that. But honestly, from an engineering perspective, it's also like a much harder problem. You can sort of exchange one carpet for another, or you can skip the carpet even in your building, or you can use a reusable carpet, and it probably will not change anything other than mainly aesthetics and maybe experience of the inhabitants of the building. But if you build with concrete versus timber, there's all kinds of structural things you need to consider, fire components, just knowledge of how we build with timber versus wood. So I would say interiors definitely more advanced, but structural materials, just a harder.
And I already know the answer, but out of curiosity, would you say you think there is a deeper focus in sustainable data for any type of furnishings or interior light fixtures at this time?
Yeah, unfortunately not. So one of the issues with FF&E and lighting right now is there's so many different variations of a single product that it's expensive currently for the manufacturers to generate this kind of data because their products are changing often, or they're not so consistent, or they just have a bunch of variations of a specific product. So it is data that's lacking for sure. And interestingly, I'm sure you know this, but interestingly, the furnishing component of buildings actually, in a lifespan of a building, especially for commercial buildings, is an absolutely massive impact of the building. So it can sometimes be up to 4 times as high as the core and shell of the building, just because we continuously change the interiors. So it is a big problem, and I think people are starting to see that and are starting to ask from manufacturers to generate this information. So I do think we'll see more of them, but not enough.
Yep. Yeah. Let's get back to your technology. Something you pinpointed, which I think I'd like to make aware of the audience, is that of what you termed as API, which I will provide a definition probably scrolling across the screen right now. But something you stated of BIM.
Mm-hmm.
Now, BIM is again another definition. I'll probably scroll during this recording. Is a very, very important tool, and I think you productize an API into BIM. I'd like you to explain a little bit, if you can, why that's a strong product offering and its purpose in general. Like, why is BIM so important? Why is your API into that so important as well?
Mm-hmm. Both great questions. So, on why BIM is important, I'm going to talk a lot about the sustainability challenges we have and sort of the need to transition to a low carbon economy, because I'm sure there's a bunch of other benefits of using BIM. But for me, the reason BIM is super important now is that the name of the game in sustainability is understanding impact prior to actually putting the building together or putting the project together. It doesn't need to be an entire building, but it's sort of making a design and then having an understanding of how good or bad is it from a sustainability standpoint. And technology, not just BIM, but any kind of technology, generally helps us sort of do these estimates or predictions of the impact we're going to create. Now, BIM is really just a fancy way of saying the technology that exists for the design and construction industry. So essentially, when you are using BIM software, you're giving yourself the opportunity to predict the future a little bit better. So that's kind of the first part. It might be, as to like how the building stands or how it looks or how you're tracking specific data points. Now, where we come in, and the reason I think our API is sort of a game changer in the whole structure of how sustainability assessments happen, is currently the way we assess the sustainability of buildings, unfortunately, is still disconnected to the digital design part. So disconnected to the BIM part. So it's essentially, even in a project where we are using BIM, the architect will create their model in Revit or whatever program they might be using. They will pass it on to the engineers, then to the contractors. The building will start being built. And then there's an external sustainability team or sustainability consultant that comes in, takes the bill of materials, types it into tools that require 1 million clicks to really generate the final report. And then they get a report that says, guys, we did really well on our building. It's like in the lower 10%, or guys, our building is way above the budget we've set in the beginning. Now, in both of those cases, you can't really do anything because the building is already in process and all of the decisions have already been made. So what we're trying to do is, while you're doing the design, if you're making a choice for a material or a type of structure that will end up exceeding your budget that you've set for the project, and when I say budget, I mean kind of your sustainability or carbon budget, then you immediately see it in real time. So you can change your decision. So what we're trying to do is, you can keep the consultant at the end of the project as a final, let's say, validation or as a compliance activity. But what you really want to be doing if you want to reduce the impact of the built environment is give access to what each of our actions are doing in terms of the performance of the building while we're actually designing them. Because it's very easy to make a change in decision when you're early stage in a project, and very, very hard to do it towards the later
That's very well put. There's a lot of companies that I would say have struggled with the exact hypothesis and solution which you just stated here. The process, and I won't be on the soapbox of this part, but the process of the creation of a structure has been in a very traditional mindset for decades at this point. It's been a consistent type of development. While there's been technologies that have enhanced the action and speed of that process, it still is the same process in terms of just inspiration to documentation to construction. And what you just said so politely and put is that I'd say the awareness, even the seamless integration of information in that process, can achieve a greater kind of degree of reach than just adding another layer of research or something else added to that process. So integrating to that process as best as you possibly can with BIM makes a ton of sense. That's great. So out of curiosity, and these subject matters are always supposed to be 20 minutes or less. If there was something you would say in terms of a closing statement of what you're trying to achieve, and a message you would state to the community as a closing argument, what would you say to that audience? And you can think about it for a second if you want to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, assuming a lot of our audience is designers, I think one thing I always say is you have an amazing job, an amazing opportunity to contribute positively in this whole climate change discussion. It's really not a lot of jobs that exist in the world that have the potential to have as much impact as we have as designers. So I would say, understand that, be proud of that, act on that. I think that's kind of my statement. Like, for designers to really comprehend how much impact they have on our cities, on our world, on the future of humanity, if I'm going to be a little bit grim, and then to kind of act on that. I think that's my motivational ending to this.